Is a series on being a sustainable and vital congregations. And we've talked about budgeting, finances, we've talked about buildings. Tonight, we're going to talk about leadership as we plan for our futures. What does leadership look like in the church? And we're in a changing landscape. And so we're going to talk through that tonight. We're a little bit smaller group. So that's good. From a standpoint, we can, have some probably a little bit more open conversations, but we'll see how the group grows. So what I'd like to do here for the first several minutes is kind of set the stage for the landscape of where the church is today with leadership. Now, I'm going to be talking about strictly about the LCA and our synod. Um, the figures you're going to see don't look all that great. I mean, it's in a downward trend, but I would also ask you to keep in mind that we are no different than our siblings in other denominations across the church, across faith communities. Um, it is getting harder and harder to find, to get people coming into the ministry. And so that's just a reality. I don't share these numbers to make us think it's doom and gloom, but we do share these numbers to set the stage for what's God up to in the church and what are being called to do and how are we being called to do it. When it comes to the church, some of you have been to some of my workshops. I am an avid believer that we are in the midst of a massive transition. We are being transformed. When it comes to leadership in the church, I'm talking here initially about rostered leadership. Um, these are some figures that I find interesting. These are a couple years old. I mean, we'll get 23 here pretty soon, but in 2002 in the ELCA, we had a little over 17,700 ordained ministers, ordained in word and sacrament. Okay. In 2022, so just up to 2 years ago, we were down to 15,000, almost 200. Okay. So a drop of over 2,500 available leaders in the church. And when you take a look at what happened in that time frame, we had almost 5,800 new rostered leaders come onto the roster, but we removed over 8,300. In other words, by removing, people resigned from the roster, they retired, whatever. Okay, so they long. So we in that 20 years, we dropped by over almost 2,600, a little over 2,500 leaders ordained. Now, what happened in that time frame? Retirements have increased dramatically, and even more so since 2020. The pandemic really changed a lot. Now, this is true across the board in a lot of industries, as well as the service and faith sectors. But a lot of people chose to retire. We currently in the ministry have a higher rate of younger rostered leaders leaving the ministry. They're not of retirement age, but they're doing different things. Some may even be staying in ministry, but going into different forms of ministry, not congregational ministry. So that might be chaplaincy, that might be leading other nonprofits that are faith-based, things like that. And that's happening more and more. And seminary enrollment is down significantly. I don't have 23 and 24's numbers yet, but I can tell you that in 2019, we had 465 new candidates in the LCA. In 2022, so just 2 years ago, that number was 186 new entrance candidates. Okay? So you can see a significant decrease in individuals coming into the ministry, specifically for word and sacrament. I also want to spend a little bit of time here talking about strictly our synod here in Central State Synod. When we look at leadership in this synod, or congregations, excuse me, in this synod, in 2002, we had 203 congregations. Now, when I talk about the synod, if you're not quite sure what makes up the synod, all of Kansas and all of Missouri, from border to border, east to west, north to south, that makes up, it's over 560,000 square miles. And Bishop Candia and I have probably driven most of those, if not all of those square miles. Definitely Bishop Candia. I don't know. I don't think I quite have. There's a few spots I haven't been to yet. Today, we have 151 congregations. And I've broken this down again for those of you that maybe you're unfamiliar. We are divided into 5 conferences, our congregations. We have the Border Conference, which basically is right here in the central part of the area, from Topeka north to the state line, up to the like Iowa border, and then on both sides of the state line in Kansas City, south a little bit. So all the way up north from, and then down to Topeka, and then east to west, it's uh, over to the other side of the Kansas-Missouri border. So Lee Summit area, Blue Springs, all in there. Then we have Central Kansas. That has 43 congregations in the center part of the state of Kansas. Eastern Missouri, which basically got, it's east, I would say northeast Missouri. So basically everything out once we get past the border conference, Columbia and that, all the way over to state line, Illinois state line. And then we have the Osage Conference, which is again along the border, Kansas, Missouri, but all of southern Missouri is in there as well. So it's that eastern part of the synod. And then the Western Kansas Conference, which goes all the way out to the Colorado border. It starts basically in the east of or west of Salina, and then keeps going west. Okay, and that has 28. So that's the breakdown of where we have congregations. Keep hitting the wrong. Now here's the interesting thing: we have 151 congregations. Of those congregations, individual congregations, we have 50 that have full-time pastors. 101 of our congregations have part-time or shared leadership. So what I mean by that is either they're individually, they can only afford a part-time pastor, or some of them have collaborated together to share. So parishes. So for example, out in Western Kansas, we have Prairie Faith Shared Ministry that has 3 congregations. They have 1 full-time pastor, right? But individually, not one of those 3 could afford a pastor. So 2/3 of our congregations either have to share or have part-time leadership. Okay. The number of our congregations and this number I think has changed. This is a few months old. 39 of our congregations have what we call SAMs, Synod Authorized Ministers, or PMAs that are currently somehow leading them. Okay. And the number of our congregations, of the 151, 48 of our congregations currently are involved in some form of a parish ministry setup where they're sharing leadership. Okay, so I know that's a lot of different ways to look at it, but I want to give you this notion, this idea that individual congregations are getting less and less, and more we are sharing leadership and other things, by the way. Some are sharing buildings, some are sharing staff, other staff, equipment, and so on. But you can see by that breakdown, it's significant. And so we as congregations have to begin to think about these things. Open congregations, which is really a lot of my work. That means congregations that do not have or are somehow in process of seeking new leadership. So their pastor has resigned or retired for whatever reason. They don't have one, and they're in the midst of either deciding whether they can call or calling. Okay. Of those 32, right now, only 6 can afford a full-time pastor. The other 26 know they will not be able to, or would like to, but most of them won't be able to afford full-time pastor, and are somehow trying to figure out what kind of leadership they can get. And we'll talk about some of that here in a little bit. But so that kind of gives you a breakdown of the numbers of what it looks like in this synod as well as nationally in the LCA when it comes to trained leadership. The question for us, as I started off earlier, is what does this all mean? What does it mean for the LCA? What does it mean for the Central State Synod? What does it mean for your own congregations? Or if you're, leaders in the church, whether you're ordained pastor, word and sacrament, or word and service, or PMA, or some other lay leader role, what does it mean for you as leaders? Okay. I have some thoughts that I'll share with you in a little bit, but what I'd like us to do here is we're gonna break up into maybe a couple of groups, I guess, Bishop. And I'd like you to talk about this as well as, so what does it mean for us? What do you think this means? And what do you think about the leadership in your own congregation? What are your wishes? What do you think you need for leaders? What are your wants? What are your needs? And share that amongst yourselves. And then we'll come back and kind of share a few of those thoughts and ideas, and then we'll move on to some other areas. Does everybody with me on that? I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen for a minute.
Dave, I have a question. This is Gary Borkowski. Of those open spots, is there any geographic connection to that? Are they spread all over? Is there any commonality?
Yeah, good question. More and more they're spread all over. Yeah, I mean, we initially, years ago, it was, when I first started, it was mostly like in Western Kansas, Southern Missouri, but I'm not seeing that shift anymore. I mean, it's across the board. Um, and again, it's a challenge for us, right? So uh, they experienced it first, I think, in some of the more rural areas, but it has, in our case, it's come inward, right? Because we had Western Kansas, Southern Missouri, east with far east side of, but it's come this way, and so we're all in the same boat. So yeah, it's not a geographical issue any longer. It's a community issue. Yeah, good question. Thank you, Gary. Okay, so talk about what this means, what you think this means, and also then what kind of leadership, what does it mean for your own leadership? What do you think you need and or will want, and what would that mean for you? Okay, and then we'll come back here. I'd like to just take a couple of minutes here before we move forward, just to hear from you all some thoughts that maybe you want to share from your groups. What do these numbers mean that we shared with you, or what is it? What kind of leaders? Don't everybody speak up at once.
Well, this is Gary. We didn't really get to the what kind of leaders do we? Well, we talked about the leaders we currently have a little bit, just to kind of get a picture where everybody was coming from. But we talked a little more about why this trend is happening, I guess, and don't have an answer, of course, but came up with some theories. My personal, or mine was, or that we all kind of jumped in on, was it's because somebody mentioned about all the other stuff going on Sunday morning, or you're driving to church and you see somebody out there mowing their lawn, or they're going shopping, or doing everything but going to church. And then somebody mentioned even like youth sports leagues, which have all kinds of games on Sunday morning. So it kind of popped into my head is it's like you're competing for people's time. It's a competition, and in a lot of cases we're losing, I guess. So that was kind of one thought we had.
Oh, good. Thank you. Good stuff. That's very good. Yeah. Anyone else? Adam?
Yeah, there were several things raised in our group, but I think one that is an important point to mention too is that for a lot of our congregations, the vast majority of our congregational giving is coming from our members in their 80s and 70s and 60s. So even what budgets we have are being met by the smallest and oldest groups in our congregations.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks. What's the of those congregations that have full-time pastors? What's the average attendance size, or the range of attendance size of those?
Yeah, I haven't looked at it like that, but just across the board, from a high level view of the ones I can think of, it's across the board. It's from 50 to several hundred. So yeah, I don't think it necessarily ranges just by the people, because you can have, statistically speaking, if you've got dedicated participation and giving, a congregation of 50 or so can do that. So I haven't looked at it that way. I don't think any of us have really thought about looking at it that way. It'd be an interesting thing to look at.
I do think those statistics from the ELCA, when they were kind of predicting the percentage of congregations that can afford a full-time pastor, I was thinking that kind of a benchmark is around 100, average worship attendance of about 100.
Yeah.
that as you start, if you go a lot below that, you can still do it, but it begins to, stress
Yeah.
the finances more. And of course, it makes a difference. Do you have a mortgage? Do you not have a mortgage? Right? Some of those kinds of things. So it's kind of hard, but I think they use around that to kind of as a predictor of a size of congregations to be able to afford a full-time pastor and benefits without it being, a
burden.
significant
Yeah.
financial strain.
Well, there would be other staffing would play into that also. Then, do you have an office manager, a full-time, an organist,
Sure.
a choir
Absolutely.
director? I mean, you could say we
Yeah,
can afford
all
a
of that.
pastor, but then the pastor's doing all of it.
I mean, all of that plays into, what you can afford. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago, that financial piece. So those are decisions you have to make then as congregations. What has to give if we can't afford it all? So I'm going to go ahead, unless there's something else anybody really wants to share. I'll throw out one other thought here, and that is, so I personally believe the church isn't dying. I do believe, as I said at the beginning, I think we're in a time of transformation. And I believe God is calling us to be church differently. We have spent the last, particularly 100+ years, thinking of congregational churches being their own, right? Doing their own thing in their own building with their own pastor, and never the two shall meet. We've got 4 churches on each corner, and we all do our own thing. I think the church is being transformed. I think God's calling us into something new, and our challenge is to figure out what that looks like. And I don't think it's a model. I think it's different wherever it's a contextual model. What is needed? We used to think parish ministry was strictly for rural congregations. Well, I can tell you today in North St. Louis, we have 8 congregations that have been working together over the last 3 years to figure things out. And just at the end of last year, 2 of them have paired up to share a leader. We've got 3 more working very seriously to figure out how to share a leader. And that's in St. Louis. We met today with 13 pastors in the border conference here in Kansas City, just talking about what does collaborative ministry look like. And again, we had pastors from small congregations all the way to our largest in the area. So I think we're being called. I think these numbers say something. To me, what they mean is we've got to consider being the church in a different way. Okay. I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about how the ELCA views leadership from across the board, and we'll talk about rostered leadership as well as lay leadership. This is right out of your Constitution, and the ELCA's Constitution, the Synod Constitution, and the Congregational Constitutions. In Chapter 7, it says this: the ministry of the baptized people of God. The church affirms the universal priesthood of all its baptized members. In its function and in its structure, this church commits itself to the equipping and supporting of all its members for their ministries in the world. And in this church, it is within this context of ministry that this church calls some of its baptized members for specific ministries in the church. And this paragraph speaks to both lay and ordained. Okay, so what we're saying is, and we profess this is part of our understanding of church, is we believe in the universal priesthood of all believers. We are all priests in the church. We are all leaders in the church. We have different gifts, different expertises, but that we're called to share those gifts within the community of the church. In the LCA, when it comes to some of the specific types of leadership, we have 2 types of rostered leaders, rostered being ordained. We have word and sacrament leaders, which we call pastors, right? Reverends. And we have word and service leaders, which in the LCA now, we as of several years ago, they're all called deacons. Okay. And we get that office, those offices from this within the people of God, and for the sake of the gospel, ministry is entrusted to all believers, and God has instituted the office of ministry of word and sacrament. To carry out this ministry, this church calls and ordains qualified persons. So people that feel called to ordained ministry of word and sacrament, that is those that preach and teach and share the sacraments, are called to word and sacrament ministry, okay, within the church. And that's one form of rostered leaders. And that's one form that most of us are very familiar with, because that's always what we've called in our congregations. If you're not a pastor and you're a lay member here, you've always called a pastor, right? I'd like to share with you also what we profess is the role of these people, of leaders. Every minister, word and sacrament, this is again, and still in chapter 7, section 7, verse chapter 31. Every minister, word and sacrament shall, and there's two pages of this, so I'm going to go through them quickly, but I want you to hear what we are required or called to do by the Constitution, your own Constitution. Preach the word, administer the sacraments, conduct public worship, provide pastoral care, seek out and encourage qualified persons to prepare for the ministry of the gospel. In other words, look for new leaders to come into the ministry of word and sacrament and or word and service. Okay. Impart knowledge of this church and its wider ministry through available channels. In other words, we're called to share what the LCA is doing, what the church is doing around the world, right? Witness to the kingdom of God in the community, in the nation, and abroad. You know, we're to call out what God is doing in the world. And we are to speak publicly to the world in solidarity with the poor and oppressed, advocating dignity, justice, and equity for all people, working for peace and reconciliation among nations, caring for the marginalized, embracing and welcoming racially and ethnically diverse populations. In addition, we are to offer instruction, confirm, marry, visit the sick and distressed within our congregations, bury the dead, relate to all schools and organizations within the ministry, install regularly elected congregational councils, with the council, administer discipline, endeavor to increase the support given by the congregation to the work of the church-wide organization and the synod. So we're called into that whole level of stewardship, not just for the congregation, but for the congregation to share that amongst the wider church. And we're called to encourage adherence to conventional relationships with this church, with the LCA expressed by our Constitution, our bylaws, our resolutions of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. That's a lot. So when the bishop or I hear things like, well, my pastor's talking about this, well, as long as they're preaching the gospel, they're supposed to be talking about what's happening in the world. They're supposed to be talking, lifting up, and they're supposed to be advocating for the marginalized. That's what your pastors are called. That's what they're trained to do, and that's what we're called to do. Okay? We also have the ministry of word and service. Some people are called to ministry, ordained ministry, but it's not a pastoral role they're called to. They feel called to the service side. That's what I would call the doing side. Not that pastors don't do, but pastors are one of our key roles according to Scripture is to prepare people for the work of the church, right? We're to prepare those. This is someone that not only prepares, but is actually involved in it. And the church calls and receives onto the roster qualified persons for word and service. These are people that exemplify the life of Christ-like service to all persons in creation. They are involved in nurturing, healing, leading, advocating dignity and justice. See, there's some similarities here, right? And equipping the whole people of God for their life of witness and service within and beyond the congregation. Again, equipping our people to go out into the world and be the hands and feet of Christ. And here are their responsibilities listed. Be rooted in the Word of God, proclamation and service, advocate a prophetic diakonia, fancy word for service, that commits itself to risk-taking and innovative service on the frontiers of the church, that the church's outreach, to be out in the margins. Speak publicly to the world in solidarity with the poor and oppressed, advocating dignity, justice, and equity for all people, working for peace, reconciliation among all nations. Any of this sound familiar? You see, it's this called into ordained ministry. We are prepared, we are educated and prepared for this type of work. Okay? And we're called, again, as deacons, as word and service leaders, to equip the baptized for the work of the church in the world. And here's some more. Encourage mutual relationships, practice stewardship that respects God's gifts of time and talents and resources, be grounded in a gathered community for ongoing diaconal formation, form our people to do service in the world, literally, share the knowledge of this church and its wider ministry. Again, Notice there is an emphasis here on the wider ministry. Now again, we need to be sustainable and vital congregations as standalone, but we also need to be involved in the wider church. What's happening within the synod? Within your wider communities, maybe within your counties, whatever. But we need to look at this in a broader perspective because that's how God looks at it. And identify and encourage qualified persons to prepare for the ministry of sharing the gospel. Okay. And prior to ordination, all rostered leaders have to go through what we call candidacy. That's at least a 4-year process for most, if not longer, depending on their capacity and their individual situation. And candidacy ensures that people are called. We believe that God calls us. It's a multi-level call. God calls us individually, but we also, as the church, want to hear, does the wider community hear a call for this person? And does the church hear a call for this person? So there's that 3-pronged approach that the candidacy committee, that's their job, is to see, is this something that, I remember when I first felt called, one of the challenges the committee challenged me on is, are you sure you're not called to teaching, right? Not that pastors don't teach, but is that your call, or is it to word and sacrament, right? And so there's a discernment that goes through candidacy. Candidacy also ensures proper education, theological, administrative, all of that. And it also provides for contextual training and formation of the role that we feel called to. So whether we're called to word and service or word and sacrament, that formation happens through candidacy, okay, in contextual training, in education, and so on. So those are people that are on the roster, individuals that are on the roster and ordained, have gone through years of education and training to be called into these positions. Okay? That's a really fast overview on leadership in the church on the ordained side. Any questions before I turn this over to Pastor Adam?
Okay, go ahead.
Dave, I have a question.
Okay.
My name's Bill Freeman. I'm in St. John's in Pittsburgh.
Okay. Can you speak up just a little bit or get a little closer to the mic?
Oh, sure. My name's Bill Freeman and it's St. John's in Pittsburgh.
Yep.
That was a well done presentation on responsibilities there for all of us. But one responsibility I seem to come up short on myself personally is missionary work, the unchurched. And obviously, all of us are suffering with smaller congregations, some that can't afford pastors as a result of that. And so what is Synod or National? How are they addressing the missionary and the unchurched and programs to bring them to ELCA Lutheran churches?
Well, I'm not trying to pass the buck on this, but I think it has to happen. That's got to happen locally, right? I mean, what has to happen is, and again, I think it's more the old model of missionary. We go and we instill our thoughts into people, and then they come to us. I don't think the LCA follows that model any longer, and well, I know we don't.
Well, I would agree with you, Dave. So far, we're doing good. We're in agreement.
Yeah. So
my question would be this, to that response, is we have a congregation of 65 or so on Sundays.
Yep.
Both in the pews and on Zoom. But probably all of us have some sort of a day job, and we probably I don't focus on missionary work for church. So what kind of programs, again, is national, is Synod? What can you do? What kind of programs can you all do for your congregations to help them in that area of problem, because the money problem is lack of members.
So again, I'm going to come back where I was heading there. I get nervous when we talk about programs because that implies that it's something. If we just do these 7 steps, this will get people to come. I'm an advocate that people come because of relationships. They come because they have a need and they realize there is a community that can support and care for them. And the way we do that locally is we do that by being involved in the community. I agree. When I was in business before I came into ministry, I was a president of a corporation, and we had groups I allowed people to, talk about their faith at lunchtime or wherever they could, as long as it didn't interfere with their jobs. They weren't, to proselytize, but they did that. I used to send a Bible study at lunchtime in the cafeteria. Okay. When I announced that I was leaving business to go into ministry, I had people coming into my office saying, "This doesn't surprise me," because they wouldn't. I'm not doing that to pat myself on the back. What I'm saying is how I lived my life, people were drawn to that. That's what will grow the church. And over, when I hear people talk about, well, I see this congregation growing, it's going to be relationships. It's not a program per se. It is being faithful. Or my previous congregation, we were very active in the community with a hunger program, a feeding program. And people would say, "Well, what are you doing this? Or who's doing?" Well, this is my church. We do this. We feed these families because we don't get anything out of it. What we get out of it is we know people are being fed. People are drawn to that. It's not about whether we have a band or an organ or whatever. They're drawn to that. And I think our leaders, pastors as well as leaders, we need to be looking not at programming sort of per se, but in how do we help our folks live out their faith in a healthy way and be invitational and inclusive, because that's what it's going to take. So I know people want a fixed program. I don't think fixed programs work. We worked under that model for a long time. We just kept cranking out programs, and here we sit. So we can get into more of that later. We can do some workshops later on that if you'd really like. But
could I add a little bit too, Dave?
Sure, go ahead.
I was just going to say, just on Sunday as our sending hymn, we sang, "We all are one in mission. We all are one in call. Our varied gifts united by Christ, the Lord of all." And I mean, that's part of what our faith in our church is. We each, and that's part of what makes us uniquely Lutheran as well, is we talk about what it means to have vocation. And, there are people who serve in a vocation of pastoral leadership as clergy, but everybody, you mentioned, the jobs that everybody goes to every day. Those are actually the work that you do every day, is part of God's ministry to the world. And we are all active in that ministry together and sharing that witness of Jesus Christ. That doesn't mean telling your coworkers about the Bible or even necessarily inviting them to church, but it is about being a witness of this faith in Christ. And the way that we as members of our congregation carry that witness out of our church doors into the wider community and express that through the things we do and the people we meet and the work that we do, that is what ultimately makes others in the community say, "Hey, I want to be a part of this thing. I want to be part of what these people are a part of." And that's really where the work of growing the church really gets its steam up.
And along with that, so I'm going to carry this on and then turn this over to Pastor Adam. I also think, and this is where what Pastor Adam's going to talk about now I think is critical. We have left a lot of this, and again, this is when I say we, I mean me too, right? Before I became rostered, and even after I became rostered, we in the church have got this feeling that, we have paid staff to do that, right? We've got a pastor. That's pastor's job, or that's our youth person's job. It is all of it. We are the priesthood of all believers, and I think if there is a program, one of it is prepare our leaders to be able to witness in the world, right? And then we share that on down. And I think Pastor what Pastor Adam's going to talk about is what do we have for our lay leadership? And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Pastor Adam.
So I'm going to talk to you about the Parish Ministry Associate Program. First, I should introduce myself. For those of you who might not know me, I'm Pastor Adam Woodka. I serve, as we talked about in our group, I serve 3/4 time as the pastor of St. Mark Lutheran Church. I'm out in Great Bend, Kansas, in the middle of the state. And I serve as a 1/4 time on Synod staff as the director of lay ministry. And part of my work is overseeing the Parish Ministry Associate Program. I work with Bishop Candia and Pastor Wetter with regard to making sure our congregations are served, and especially with the synod authorized ministers that serve around our synod. I'm going to talk a little more about what that means in a minute. But when you hear the word PMA, it means Parish Ministry Associate. It has a long legacy in our synod. It has been, in fact, this program is nearly as old as the synod itself, started in the early 90s. And from that beginning, the PMA program has really served a dual purpose in the education of the lay leadership of our synod. And these 2 bullet points you see here are quoted from our PMA handbook, which you can find on the PMA page of the synod website. And that's my last slide has a link to that too. But so one purpose of the PMA program is to equip people for their own ministry as servants of Christ and stewards of God's mysteries. And I'll unpack that a little more on the next slide. The second one is identifying and nurturing the gifts God has given God's people for public ministry so that the good news can be shared among all people. Now, I have those split into 2 bullet points. Of course, there is an overlap of those 2 purposes. This is not to say one bullet point represents one kind of PMA and the other represents another. But they do, even though there's overlap, these 2 ideas kind of distinguish the 2 major ways in which our certified PMAs serve within their congregations and within our synod. So we can go to the next slide here. I really, well, I'll say a little more here. So what does a PMA do? What does a parish ministry associate do? So this is where I kind of break apart those 2 purposes. But remember, again, there's overlap. So these 2 columns that we're looking at, everybody does this, it falls into both of these to some degree. But on the left side here, we have lay leaders equipped in their own ministry as God's servants and stewards. And so a parish ministry associate by design, by the way the program was intended, are people who are called to serve in their own congregations and or community. And in fact, their certification as a parish ministry associate is something that is recognized by their congregation. And they serve, many of our PMAs serve as congregational leaders in some aspect. We have parish ministry associates that serve as, administrators on staff of their congregation, teachers, musicians, other kinds of staff and leadership roles within their congregation. And most of our PMAs, we do have several that are retired from their sort of careers, but we do have many that are still actively working, and they include people from all backgrounds, white and blue collared. We have nurses, public educators, engineers, lawyers, civil servants, all kinds of very passionate people in their daily living and in the life of the church who do this. On the right column then is also what that second bullet point was talking about in terms of the public ministry in which these leaders may sometimes serve, sharing the good news among God's people. Now, certainly church administrators and Sunday school teachers and musicians are sharing the good news among God's people. But this is also where we get into serving in more of that pastoral role, that word and sacrament role. And we do have a lot of PMAs who serve alongside pastors, or even in synod authorized ministry settings, SAM, that do pulpit supply who are authorized, may be authorized by the bishop to preside at Holy Communion and lead a whole worship service. And some of them do that at home or elsewhere. So, for an example, a congregation that has a PMA, a certified PMA within the congregation, and they also have a called pastor, if that pastor is going to, be indisposed for a number, like a couple of weeks, maybe on vacation, and there isn't another uh, um, substitute that can come in and serve, the PMA could be authorized to lead, worship and Holy Communion and preaching during the time when the pastor's gone. Um, this certification that a PMA receives at the end of their education process, which I'm going to talk about on the next slide, that certification is really a symbol of the confidence and accountability that the synod has in that person, which has been instilled through the program that they've gone through, as well as a symbol of that confidence and accountability for the congregation in which they're serving as well. And as I said already, synod authorized minister is what SAM means. And this is a term that's used by the ELCA as a whole. Parish Ministry Associate, PMA, is a term that only the Central State Synod and a few other synods use the term PMA. But we make a distinction between PMA and SAM in our synod, because a person is only a SAM, a synod authorized minister, when they are serving under the direct authorization of the bishop. And I'll keep this as short as I can, but the point here being that the bishop, like Bishop Candia, is our bishop, and she is by default called as the pastor of every single one of our congregations. And when there is a called and ordained minister serving in our congregation, like for instance myself, when I'm serving here at St. Mark, it is, I'm the one who presides over word and sacrament in this congregation. But if I wasn't here, if St. Mark, something happened to me and I was no longer serving in this call, and St. Mark did not have another pastor at that time, the bishop, Candia, is the pastor of the congregation. However, she can't, as you saw in the slide Pastor Wetter was showing, she can't be serving on Sunday morning at the 101 congregations that don't currently have called pastors all at the same time, right? So therefore, for those congregations that can't have some other pastor or retired pastor or something else serving in those congregations, she can authorize people to serve in her stead as a sort of a proxy of the bishop serving in that time. And that's what a synod authorized minister is. It is somebody who has received authorization for a specified date or period of time to serve. And that is part of our ELCA polity regarding Holy Communion. We also feel it is very important, not only though that our lay ministers who are going to serve in this word and sacrament, not only that they're equipped to do so for Holy Communion, but also that we are putting good preachers in pulpits. And that is also why we go through this education process for PMA certification, because we really want to know that people are being trained, not only to sort of carry out the parts of the liturgy, but also to carry out the word to which we are called to preach as well. Most of our SAMs are PMAs. So, as I said, I guess I didn't specify this altogether. What makes the designation of a PMA distinctive from a SAM is that you can think of it, for those of you who are familiar with the public education system, I like to think of it a lot like a teaching certificate. So when a teacher completes their educational program, they receive a teaching certificate from the state usually, and then that, in this sense, a PMA, when they complete their program, they receive a PMA certificate from the synod. So they are a PMA within the Central State synod. And as long as our PMAs keep up with their continuing education and they submit their annual report and the requirements that are there for PMAs to complete, then their certification remains active. So a PMA certification is an ongoing thing that they have to do some steps to keep active, but it's ongoing. A person is only a SAM when they're authorized, which, as I said before, is either for a specific date or dates or a specific period of time. We do have some SAMs, PMA or otherwise, that serve in a congregation, for instance, for a whole year at a time. And we have covenants that are arranged between the SAM or the PMA or the person and the congregation and the bishop all sign that covenant. And those are for a whole year. But it's essentially the same thing as for a specific date, just extended to a whole year. The last point I want to mention here is I've been involved with the PMA program now for, I don't know, about 7 years. And in that time, and I've been in this position for about 4 years now. And in that time, I've seen an increase in the number of the people who are coming into the PMA program as students. The reason why they're entering that program has become more and more focused on people who are interested in keeping their congregation active and keeping the doors open, keeping the ministry of that congregation alive, in place. People that are wanting to sort of step up and do this and serve their own congregation to keep it going strong. There have been people who have been doing that for the last 3 decades, but I think more and more of the people who are coming in are sort of naming that as one of the real primary reasons why they're heeding this call. We can go to the next slide. So, Pastor Wetter had all these statistics on his first slide, and I'm a total statistics junkie, and I refrained from most of that on mine here. But one thing a couple of points I did want to throw in from what we saw on some of those slides regarding statistics in the synod. If you noticed that one that talked about the 50 congregations and the 101 congregations, we have 39 congregations that are being served some part or full time by lay ministers, by synod authorized ministers. And that means 39 out of 151 is just over 25%. That's just over 1 in 4 of our congregations. And I ran that statistic myself about 3 years ago, and it was 1 in 6. So we see that we're even more and more of our congregations are being served by authorized lay ministers. So what does it take to become a PMA? This is really kind of the nuts and bolts of the program itself. There are 3 steps. We have enrollment, we have the bulk of the program, which is the education or coursework, and then at the end we have certification. Enrollment, and I kind of wear different hats as the director of lay ministry for all of this. So I'm heavily involved in enrollment and recruitment. And if you have anybody in your congregations that might be interested in joining the PMA program, even if they just have questions, please feel free to send them my way. I'm more than happy to talk to them. I can have a Zoom meeting with them or email or phone call or whatever we want to do. The enrollment process involves, there's paperwork. So there's like an application there's an application, an essay that the prospective student does, and there's a fee that's turned in along with that, as well as a congregational endorsement that is filled out and sent in. So part A is sort of the paperwork piece. Part B is, again, part of that accountability aspect of the program. We partner with Safe Gatherings, which is out of Kansas City. Safe Gatherings has an abuse prevention training program that's done online, and also a background check. And part of that application fee for entering the program goes to pay for that background check. This is a much lighter version of the process that a candidate for ordained ministry goes through with candidacy, but it's sort of parallel to that. We want to have some of these steps of accountability to make sure that the people that we are bringing through this program can be trusted with the ministry of the church. And then finally, we have an interview with members of the PMA team to talk about, the person's background, their interest in the program, uh, how they kind of see the process of education unfolding, questions that they have that I might not have already answered, et cetera. Then as we get into once a person then is officially enrolled in the program, then that's where they kind of hit the bulk of the material, which is the coursework. And then we do have people sometimes start their courses while they're still in the middle of the enrollment process. That's fine. And it's for a presentation other than the one today, but all of the courses that are available for PMAs can be taken by anybody. They're not limited to people who are in this kind of program. Anybody can take these courses for their own enrichment. But we especially work to make sure that these areas, these competencies are covered for our parish ministry associate. So we require a course in Lutheran worship, one in Lutheran confessions. That's like the Catechism, the Book of Concord, Old Testament course, a New Testament course, a course in ethics, Lutheran ethics, that is a theology course, a course in preaching, one in Christian caregiving or pastoral care, and then 2 electives. And we require that one of the electives has to be some kind of church history course, and the other elective is a free elective. Typically, as I say on the top there, that takes about 3 to 4 years for most students to complete those 9 courses. It's sort of designed that they can easily, any student, if they have the time to focus on the studies, could easily complete this over the course of 3 years, because they can basically take 3 classes each year for 3 years. But we have some students that take a little bit longer, some 4 or 5 or even 6 years. We have some students that have finished in like 2.5 years that really buckle down on it. And the final stage, then, once they're usually when they're just about finished, we get to the final stage here and schedule another interview with the PMA team to kind of talk with this person now on the back end about their experience through the program. Again, talking about how they're going to use their PMA certification, what they sort of envision in their ministry, and then we actually get them certified. And there's an order for recognizing the PMA certification in the congregation that I usually then share with the congregation, and they can do that during like a Sunday morning worship service. And then also during our synod assembly, we recognize all those who have received certifications in the last year. And as I mentioned before, there's an annual report, continuing education. We also, every person who's certified as a PMA is paired with a rostered supervisor. So in congregations where there is a pastor, the pastor is the supervisor by default. In congregations where there is not, I consult with Bishop Candia, and we appoint usually some nearby pastor to work with that PMA as a rostered supervisor. I did want to mention, I mentioned wearing other different hats. And another one of the hats that I wear during this part of the program is as during the coursework, I really function as sort of the academic advisor for our students as well. So I'm always happy to work with them to figure out which course they can take next, and to get word out to our students about where they're at and what courses they can take, and these sorts of things. Let's jump to the next slide. So this is the big question that I get a lot of times too, is how much does this cost? Because obviously nobody's made of money, including our congregations, and there is an expense to doing this. So our synod partners with several different academic institutions and programs. One of our biggest partners or 2 of our biggest partners of late are Select Learning Incorporated, which is a program under the umbrella of the ELCA. It is fully online, and I say self-paced. It is self-paced in a way, and I have facilitated several classes through Select Learning Most of them are 10 weeks long. They take place online. There's a couple of Zoom meetings spaced throughout with the course facilitator where the class can come together to discuss things. But for the most part, those 10 weeks flow on a sort of pattern, a week by week pattern of readings that are done from the text. There's video lectures that the students watch, and then there's an online forum that's hosted through the Select Learning website where they post their responses to the discussion questions, and then have to also post responses to their classmate answers to those questions, so that there's conversation happening through that. So that is really the most popular program that we use, and students can complete probably about at least 6 or 7 of those 9 courses could be completed through Select Learning. Bishop Kemper School for Ministry is another really great partner. They are located physically in Topeka, Kansas, and for potential students that are in a reasonable distance of Topeka, but even several hours away is fine. This is an Episcopal school, and they have been a partner with us in the Synod for decades, and they offer their courses are on a monthly basis. And for students that are Episcopal students that are on campus, there's like a month-long version of each of the courses that they can take. But each month's courses are also offered in a weekend intensive format that is on campus, like basically all day Saturday rather, and most of the day Sunday. I think it's probably about 16 hours maybe worth of course time condensed into one weekend. All the reading needs to be done ahead of time before that weekend, and the class gets together. There is a possibility also to Zoom those intensive weekends, but from students who have taken the courses, they highly recommend going on campus at Topeka because you really get the full experience. You get to share meals together and everything like that. Bethany House of Studies is sort of a hybrid, online or in person, and this is really kind of our own in-house program in the Synod where we sometimes offer courses that haven't been in the other institutions so that we can sort of catch students up on things. Like Lutheran worship, for instance, is one that's not often offered through other groups. The Lutheran School of Theology in St. Louis is another wonderful online program, and I highly recommend checking them out for any.
Hate to interrupt you, Adam, but
Am I
actually
out of time?
The Lutheran School of Theology in St. Louis has officially closed.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that.
So,
Well,
anyway.
they have been a great partner. They have been a great partner. But then also we do have other neighboring synods that have really great programs. The Nebraska Synod, as well as the Central Southern Illinois Synod to the east. They have programs for their lay ministry students that we have partnered with them as well. And there's more, and whatever. You can talk to me about that if you want. So the cost, the tuition cost over all 9 courses, depending on through which school that those courses are taken and everything like that, it tends to average around $2,000 to $3,000 for the whole program plus books. And as I say at the bottom of the next column, the cost of books really depends entirely on which classes are taken, but it may be around $300 to $500 for the whole program. Now, $2,000 to $3,000 is a lot of money, but we also have a scholarship reimbursement, which sadly very few of our students take advantage of this scholarship reimbursement. I had one student who just finished last year, and her congregation paid for her every single one of her courses, and she very faithfully submitted the reimbursement form for every single one of the courses. And on our PMA page on the Synod website is the scholarship form. All that a student needs to do when they successfully complete a course is fill that reimbursement form out, send it to me, and with the appropriate documentation, send it to me, and I submit a voucher to the Synod for 50% of their course fee, which gets reimbursed back to whoever paid for it. So if the student paid for it themselves, it goes back to them. If the congregation paid for it, it goes to the congregation. So for example, our courses through Select Learning, those 10-week long courses, the course fee for those is around $360 usually. So if a student does this 10-week course, $360, they then, once they complete it, fill out the scholarship form, send it to me. They or their congregation, whoever paid for it, gets reimbursed $180. So it's very worthwhile to do that. If a student does that and submits a scholarship application for every one of the courses they complete, of course, that brings the total of the cost of the program down by half, to $1,000 to $1,500, which over the course of 3 or 4 years is not a whole lot of money, plus whatever books they had. So we can go to the next slide. Oh, actually, that was it. Okay. So I did want to say a couple of other statistics that I kind of pulled up that I thought you might be interested in. We currently have 41 PMAs across the central. We have 41 active PMAs in the synod, and about two-thirds of them are currently synod authorized ministers, or serving in some capacity as SAMs, or about half of them, I guess. And we currently have 10 students that are active in the program. I have several other prospective students that are at some stage of enrollment, but we have 10 students. And I wanted to also share, because one other question I get besides the cost is, well, surely I'm too old for this, right? That we get people asking, well, what is the age of our people in the program? And it's not fair to share the age of our PMAs because many of them have been in the program for years and years. But I will tell you, of our 10 students in the program, the average age of our 10 students is 60. Our youngest student currently in the program is 39. Our oldest student currently in the program is 81. So there can be no denial of the call. Don't give me that. And we just really have wonderful people from all walks and backgrounds. And like I said at the beginning, I'm more than happy to answer any questions that anybody has about it. If you have anybody in your congregation that just seems to have that spark for ministry, I encourage you to send them my way. That last slide, if that wasn't up for long enough, all you have to do is go to the Synod website, and if you know how to type in the URL, you can just put /PMA at the end of the Synod website. But you can also go to the ministries link on the Synod website and select PMA program. And my contact information is on there, as well as all the documents. There's the PMA handbook that'll tell you all about the program. There's the scholarship form. The application form is not on there because I like to have conversation with the people who are interested in the program, and I will send them the application. But there's other things on there too about upcoming courses and things like that. So.
I don't mean to cut you off, but I'm aware of the time, Adam.
Please,
so thank
take
you.
it away.
Thank you.
Yep.
So again,
Thank
there's again, thank you. I want to just kind of pull things together as we send you on your way this evening. And I just want to emphasize a couple of things. Going back to what you heard Reverend Wetters say at the beginning, leadership, it really is a priesthood of all believers. I get to be in many circles around the church, visiting congregations, ascended, church-wide, research, development, all of those things. And more that I hear is that in the past, the model has been a professional pastor, employee of the church doing the work. And I don't mean to minimize the role of pastors. I've been a pastor for over 41 years, okay? It is a wonderful call. We're not going to eliminate ordination and so forth. But if we rely upon pastors to quote unquote save the church or whatever, those days are gone, my friends. And as Pastor Wetter said, that doesn't mean the church is dying. It is shifting. And you are part of that shifting. That leadership needs to be understood. There is that public leadership, right? Leading worship, being pastors and deacons, Synod authorized ministers. absolutely important because the gospel needs to be proclaimed. But that other piece of leadership, which you are all part of in the priesthood of believers, that is really all the research, all the studies, all say that that leadership is the most important as we move into whatever God is calling us to do next. So I want to emphasize leadership in that broad way. And then finally, before we close, I want to emphasize that when we talk about leadership in the church, we're talking about servant leadership. We have a lot of models, and I'm going to be blunt and direct, in our culture, our society, and politics, that leadership is about power over, it's about being the loudest voices, it's about dividing lines and so forth. We come in and we witness a very different kind of leadership that is about servanthood, that is about humility, that is about making room at the table for everyone. And I don't know how you are all, and this could be a whole nother discussion, and I don't mean to, stir things up as we're just about ready to end, your reactions to what is going on in the country around us. But it is even more vital that we step in to our call, our role to be servants of Christ, to be stewards of God's mystery, to be people that not only pray that all be shown mercy, but that we embody that. And so when I think about congregations being vital and sustainable, and please know, I get the economic worries. That's why we're doing these kinds of things. We understand the challenges. I get the challenges with our buildings and our budgets. Pastor Wetter, and again, I can tell you, we are up at night trying to figure out how we can make sure that each and every community hears the gospel. Oh my gosh, it is so needed today. Receives the sacraments, are cared for, because this is a tough world, so that we can equip one another to be the body of Christ in the world. We get all that. But there is not a solution, a program, a magic fix. It is about all of us embracing this call to be leaders in a very different way, in a very alternative way, that leadership that is based upon love and gentleness and respect for others and caring. And so as we continue to wrestle with how do we provide leadership in the church, let's keep in mind for what purpose, right? We keep coming back to that. We're going to talk about this more. We have one more session, which will be next Thursday, and we're going to bring things together, and you're going to hear that. For what purpose? Why do we have our buildings? Why do we need to meet our budget? Why do we need leaders? For what purpose? I hope it's what we understand, to participate in God's reign of radical love and justice for the world. And so that's what we're going to invite people to come back to next. But again, priest of all believers, stewards of God's mystery, servants of Christ, the importance of being public witnesses to this radical, wonderful, turning the world upside down message of grace and love. I can't think of a time that it is needed more than at this time. So thank you very much. And again, announcement about next time, or are you just saying goodbye?
Yeah, no, I was going to say next week,
Yep.
same time, same place. The link is on the website. Look forward to seeing you. And as Bishop Candy has said, we're going to kind of wrap this up and pull it together to talk about, where do you go from here? What do we do with all of this? So have good weeks. I enjoy hearing from all of you through the week. I've been getting emails and texts on different things. Please keep that up. I'm glad these are, the topics that we're talking about are hitting home for y'all. And please keep in touch, and we'll see y'all next week. God bless.